Tell Lucky I said no. Dutch Schultz pushed the stacks of cash across the table, not even looking up at his lieutenant. October 23rd, 1935. Palace Chop House, Newark. The back room smelled like cigar smoke and old money. Abe Landau stood in the doorway, shifting his weight. He'd worked for Dutch for 8 years. He knew that tone. The boss had made up his mind. Dutch, Lucky ain't asking. He's telling. You keep pushing Dewey, you're gonna bring heat on all of us. Now Dutch looked up. His eyes were cold. I built this empire. I took Harlem from that colored woman and her pet enforcer. I went to war with the biggest families in New York and won. You think I'm scared of some prosecutor in a fancy suit? Abe didn't answer. Because 3 years ago, Dutch had said almost the exact same thing about a young black enforcer named Bumpy Johnson. That colored woman's pet had nearly destroyed Dutch's entire operation. Dutch had survived that war. Barely. But he'd learned nothing from it. And in 72 hours, that arrogance would cost him his life. Arthur Flegenheimer, that was his real name. Born in the Bronx in 1902 to German Jewish immigrants. His father abandoned the family when Arthur was 14. His mother worked herself to exhaustion in a sweatshop. Arthur took a different path. By 17, he was running with street gangs. By 20, he had his own crew. By 30, he was Dutch Schultz, the most feared bootlegger in New York. The name came from a notorious gang leader who terrorized the Bronx decades earlier. Arthur borrowed it, made it his own, turned it into a brand that made strong men nervous. But the original Dutch Schultz had been smart enough to know when to back down. Arthur Flegenheimer never learned that lesson. That's when Dutch decided Harlem was his for the taking. The neighborhood was a gold mine, the numbers racket, an illegal lottery where people bet pennies and won dollars, generated millions every year. And it was all controlled by black operators. Madame Stephanie St. Clair, the numbers queen, ran the biggest operation. Dutch saw easy money. Take Harlem from a woman and her colored runners, then expand his empire. Simple. He sent emissaries first. Sat down with Madame St. Clair at her club on 133rd Street. The message was polite but clear. Work with Dutch, pay tribute, or get buried. Stephanie St. Clair looked at these white men sitting in her club and laughed. Then she pointed to the corner where a young man stood watching. Tall, quiet, eyes that missed nothing. You see him? That's Bumpy Johnson. And if you come back here again with threats, you'll learn why they call him Bumpy. Dutch's men reported back. The boss wasn't impressed. A woman and her bodyguard. That's all that stood between him and millions. He sent 12 men to Harlem, not to negotiate, to take. What happened next became legend. A war that lasted 3 years, over 40 murders. Buildings burned. Police bought and paid for on both sides. The streets of Harlem ran red, and Dutch, despite all his money and firepower and connections to the Italian mafia, couldn't break Bumpy Johnson. Every time Dutch sent men to take a policy bank, Bumpy hit back harder. When Dutch kidnapped runners, Bumpy burned Dutch's warehouses. When Dutch tried to kill Madame St. Clair, Bumpy walked into a room full of Dutch's soldiers and walked out alive while they carried out the bodies. February 1933, the Cotton Club basement. Dutch sent 15 men to corner Bumpy. Kill him. End this. Only one man walked out, half dead, carrying a message, a playing card, the ace of spades covered in blood. Bumpy's message was clear. Keep coming, and I'll keep collecting. Dutch finally understood. This wasn't some street thug he could intimidate. This was a tactician, a strategist, someone who'd survived worse than anything Dutch could throw at him. And more importantly, Bumpy had something Dutch didn't: the loyalty of Harlem. When Dutch's men walked those streets, they were invaders. When Bumpy walked those streets, he was home. The war ended not because Dutch won, but because Lucky Luciano intervened. Luciano, the most powerful mob boss in America, sat Dutch down and explained reality. You're spending a fortune fighting a guy who's spending nickels. You're bringing heat on all of us. The cops are watching Harlem like hawks because of your war. End it. Dutch had no choice. He negotiated. And to his shock, Bumpy didn't ask for surrender. He asked for partnership. Equal partnership. The numbers racket would stay in black hands. Bumpy and Madame St. Clair would run it. But they'd pay a percentage to the Italian families for protection. And in exchange, Dutch would get his cut without the war. It was the smartest move Bumpy ever made. He turned an enemy into a reluctant partner, kept control of Harlem, and showed the white mob that black gangsters could negotiate from strength. Dutch hated it, but he took the deal. Because the alternative was bleeding money and soldiers in a war he couldn't win. That should have taught him something. Should have shown him that underestimating your opponent, assuming you're smarter or stronger or more ruthless, that assumption can destroy you. But Dutch Schultz never learned. By 1935, Dutch had a new enemy. Not another gangster. A prosecutor, Thomas Dewey. Dewey was young, ambitious, and determined to make his name by taking down organized crime. He'd already gone after several mob bosses. Now he had Dutch in his sights. Tax evasion, racketeering, charges that could put Dutch away for decades. Lucky Luciano and the Commission, the ruling body of the Italian mafia, saw the danger. Dewey was bringing too much heat, drawing too much attention, making it harder for everyone to operate. They told Dutch to lay low, take a vacation, let the lawyers handle it. Eventually, Dewey would move on to another target. Dutch refused. "I didn't build this empire by hiding," he told them. "Dewey wants a fight? I'll give him a fight." And then Dutch said the words that signed his death warrant. "I'm going to kill him, kill the prosecutor, send a message that nobody messes with Dutch Schultz." The commission went silent. Killing a prosecutor? That was insane. That would bring the full weight of the federal government down on the entire mob. Every gangster in America would be a target. It would be the end of everything they'd built. Lucky Luciano tried to reason with him. "Dutch, think about what you're saying. You kill Dewey, you kill all of us. The feds will never stop. They'll tear this organization apart. I don't care. He wants to make an example of me. I'll make an example of him first." October 23rd, 1935. The same arrogance that made Dutch underestimate Bumpy Johnson was now making him underestimate the commission. He thought he was untouchable, thought his reputation and his money made him bigger than the rules, thought he could do whatever he wanted because he was Dutch Schultz. Abe Landau watched his boss count money and knew that same look in Dutch's eyes was the look he'd had before the Harlem War. The look of a man who'd convinced himself he couldn't lose. "Boss, maybe you should listen to Lucky this time." Dutch laughed. "Lucky's getting soft, worried about prosecutors and publicity. I built this empire by taking what I wanted. Nobody tells me what to do." Abe left the room. He had a decision to make. October 24th, 1935, 48 hours left. Lucky Luciano called an emergency meeting of the commission. 5 families, the most powerful men in organized crime. They gathered in a Manhattan warehouse, faces grim. "Dutch is going to kill Dewey," Lucky said. "He's not bluffing. He's already picked the date. November 1st. Frank Costello, one of Lucky's most trusted allies, shook his head. "He's going to get us all killed." "I know. So what do we do?" The room went silent. Everyone knew what had to happen. They just didn't want to say it out loud. Finally, Lucky spoke. "The commission votes. Dutch Schultz. Do we sanction him?" One by one they voted. It was unanimous. Dutch Schultz had to die. The same organization he'd helped build, the same men he'd worked with for years, had just ordered his execution. Not because they hated him, because he'd become too dangerous, too reckless, too arrogant to see that his actions threatened everyone. It was exactly what Bumpy Johnson had tried to teach him 3 years earlier. In the underworld, loyalty matters more than strength. Strategy matters more than violence. And the moment you think you're bigger than the organization, you're already dead. October 25th, 1935. 24 hours left. Dutch spent his last full day alive the same way he spent every day, collecting money, making threats, convinced of his own invincibility. He had dinner at a restaurant in Manhattan, steak and potatoes, a bottle of expensive wine. He laughed with his crew, told stories about the old days, talked about what he'd do after he dealt with Dewey. Abe Landau sat across from him, barely eating. He knew. He'd gotten word. Charlie Workman and Mendy Weiss, two of the Commission's best killers, were already in position. The hit was scheduled for tomorrow night. Abe thought about warning Dutch. They'd been through wars together, made millions together. But warning Dutch meant going against the Commission, and going against the Commission meant dying alongside him. So Abe said nothing, just watched his boss enjoy his last meal. October 26th, 1935. 10:15 p.m. Dutch Schultz walked into the Palace Chop House in Newark for the last time, his regular booth in the back, his regular order. Steak, rare, whiskey, neat. Abe Landau, Otto Berman, and Bernard Rosenkrantz sat with him, his most loyal men. They didn't know they were already dead, too. 10:30 p.m. Charlie Workman and Mendy Weiss entered through the back door. They'd studied the layout, knew where Dutch would be sitting, knew the bathroom had a door that led directly to the back room. Workman carried a .38 revolver. Weiss had a sawed-off shotgun. Dutch was in the bathroom when they came in. The first shots hit Abe Landau in the chest. He went down immediately. Otto Berman tried to run. The shotgun blast caught him in the back. Bernard Rosenkrantz pulled his gun, but Workman was faster. 2 shots to the stomach. Then Workman kicked open the bathroom door. Dutch Schultz was washing his hands. He looked up, saw the gun. For the first time in years, saw something he couldn't intimidate or buy or fight his way out of. The bullet hit him just below the ribs. Not immediately fatal, but enough. Workman and Weiss were gone in seconds, out the back door, into a waiting car, disappeared into the night. Dutch Schultz stumbled out of the bathroom, blood soaking through his shirt. He collapsed at his booth, the same booth where, 72 hours earlier, he'd refused to listen to Lucky Luciano, the same booth where he'd convinced himself he was untouchable. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later. Dutch was still alive, barely. They rushed him to Newark City Hospital. The doctors did what they could, but the bullet had torn through vital organs, internal bleeding, infection spreading. Dutch Schultz died at 8:35 p.m. on October 24th, 1935. His last words were delirious rambling. Something about a boy and a dog and French-Canadian bean soup. The morphine had taken his mind before death took his body. He was 33 years old. The newspapers called it gang violence. The police investigated but found nothing. No witnesses willing to talk. No evidence that led anywhere. The commission sent flowers to his funeral. A gesture of respect, or maybe mockery. Bumpy Johnson, reading the news in Harlem, didn't celebrate, didn't gloat. He'd learned something from Dutch Schultz, a lesson in what not to become. Power without wisdom is just violence waiting to destroy itself. Strength without strategy is just a countdown to failure. And the moment you think you're bigger than the game reminds you that you're just another player. Dutch Schultz made 2 fatal mistakes in his life. The first was underestimating Bumpy Johnson. That cost him 3 years, 40 soldiers, and millions of dollars. But he survived. The second was underestimating the commission. That cost him everything. In the end, it wasn't the police who took Dutch down. It wasn't a prosecutor. It wasn't a rival gang. It was his own arrogance. The same arrogance that made him think a black enforcer from Harlem couldn't beat him. The same arrogance that made him think he could kill a prosecutor without consequences. The same arrogance that made him believe the rules didn't apply to Dutch Schultz. That arrogance killed him just as surely as Charlie Workman's bullet. And Bumpy Johnson, the man Dutch had dismissed as just another street thug, went on to rule Harlem for another 30 years. Not because he was the strongest, not because he was the most ruthless, because he was smart enough to know that in the underworld, the moment you think you've won, you've already lost. If this story of hubris, power, and fatal mistakes moved you, subscribe for more untold stories from Harlem's underworld. Drop a like if you understand that intelligence beats arrogance every time. And in the comments, let me know. What do you think was Dutch Schultz's biggest mistake? Underestimating Bumpy Johnson in 1932, or defying the commission in 1935?